Hello, and welcome to Cybersecurity Today. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins, and we're set to explore the latest and most critical updates in the realm of computer security. Over the next 30 minutes, brace yourself for a stimulating broadcast filled with insightful discussions and the freshest developments in cybersecurity. If this is your first time tuning in, allow me to introduce you to our program. Our show uniquely blends the formats of a talk show and a newscast, designed to cater to a diverse audience, ranging from cybersecurity beginners all the way to seasoned experts. For those new to the field, we provide essential information and resources to safeguard your digital spaces. For our advanced viewers, expect in-depth analysis and progressive insights from prominent industry leaders. Sit back and enjoy as we embark on an informative and captivating exploration of cybersecurity. We hope that you find today's show both enlightening and enjoyable. In our first segment, which we refer to as Cyber Bites, this delves into the latest developments and events in the cybersecurity industry, covering everything from significant data breaches all the way to emerging threats. This segment is crucial for anyone aiming to stay updated on the swift evolution of this dynamic industry. Then, in our second segment, we're delighted to host Mr. Antonio Luna, a prominent expert in cybersecurity and offensive cybersecurity with a distinguished career spanning over 2 decades. As the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of LUSEC Solutions Incorporated, Mr. Luna oversees the company's technical direction and spearheads cybersecurity consulting and educational services across government and commercial sectors. His profound expertise includes risk management, forensics investigations, and implementation of comprehensive security solutions. Today, he will impact his knowledge on cracking the code, the world of offensive cybersecurity, providing invaluable insights into proactive cybersecurity measures and best practices. Okay, so let's dive into Cyber Bites and explore the current landscape today in the cybersecurity industry. In current news, over 60 leading tech companies, including giants like Google and Microsoft, have pledged to prioritize cybersecurity in their technology development. The commitment, part of CISA's Secure by Design initiative, aims to enhance product resilience against cyber threats. Companies will implement stronger security measures such as default multi-factor authentication and rapid patch installations, while increasing transparency in vulnerability disclosures. The collective action follows recent high-profile breaches, underscoring the urgency for improved security in tech products. In other news, the White House has released version 2.0 of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, focusing on protecting critical infrastructure sectors such as healthcare, education, energy, and water. The strategy outlines new objectives and updates progress on existing ones, with specific tasks assigned to the Department of Health and Human Services and Education to enhance cybersecurity practices. It emphasizes the role of technology companies in improving cybersecurity across all sectors, as highlighted by Eric Goldstein of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at the recent RSA conference. The federal government continues to advocate for secure by design software development, with significant industry pledges expected to be announced soon. In other news, the Biden administration's $13 billion cybersecurity investment for federal agencies overlooks critical areas such as foundational research and standard setting, with the National Institute of Standards and Technology receiving insufficient funds for his expanded role in developing cybersecurity standards and guidelines. Despite being central to U.S. cybersecurity policy, NIST's budget has not kept pace with its responsibilities, which now includes developing guidelines for critical software, securing software supply chains, and establishing standards for artificial intelligence development and evaluation. The Cyberspace Solitarium Commission has warned that NIST's lack of necessary resources to supply its mission requirements, and without proper funding, NIST will struggle to fulfill its duties, potentially compromising U.S. national security. It's imperative that Congress increases NIST budget to ensure the agency can efficiently carry out its critical research and developmental task. That's going to do it for our Cyber Bytes segment. After a short break, we'll return with Mr. Antonio Luna to delve into cracking the code, the world of offensive cybersecurity. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with a more comprehensive insight into this important area of cybersecurity. Welcome back to Cybersecurity Today. Have you heard about penetration testing or offensive cybersecurity, but aren't quite sure what these terms involve and what they really mean? In this next segment, we're going to dig deep into these concepts. Today, we're delighted to welcome Mr. Antonio Luna, a prominent expert in offensive cyber and penetration testing. His vast experience and knowledge in proactive cybersecurity measures has been instrumental in developing and implementing cutting-edge solutions across government as well as commercial sectors. He'll shed light on cracking the code, the world of offensive cybersecurity, discussing how organizations can leverage offensive cyber strategies to uncover vulnerabilities and fortify their defenses against digital threats. Antonio, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. How are you?
Awesome, awesome. And we're so excited for you to be here. I thought maybe what we could ask, just to kind of level set everybody that might be watching today's episode, is to have you maybe just kind of provide kind of context. Like what is penetration testing and how might it differ from other types of security assessments that people might have heard about? Can you talk about that for a minute?
Sure. There are a lot of different types of assessments that can be conducted, even though most people tend to think that there's just one type of vulnerability assessment. Oftentimes we tend to get questions about the same type of assessment, but in reality, when we go in and we shine light on the kinds of vulnerabilities that could be found across the network, there are many, many different types of assessments. In contrast to a regular vulnerability assessment, the penetration test is mainly there to validate the level of security that that particular organization feels that they're at. A penetration test has very little value without the organization having gone through and conducted a thorough routine set of vulnerability assessments. We can go into a little bit more detail about it, but penetration testing will help you validate the level of security that you believe you're at by attempting to exploit those vulnerabilities that may be found.
Understood, understood. Would you mind maybe for our audience providing some context in terms of the phases that might be involved in a typical penetration test or offensive security assessment?
Sure. When you begin with a vulnerability assessment, we normally tell the clients that the purpose or the goal of the vulnerability assessment, which is a perfectly great first step in the pen testing methodology, the vulnerability assessment would help the client identify any vulnerabilities, any and all vulnerabilities that they may have in their environment. I say any and all because we're looking at vulnerabilities that are related to the network, to the host, to the application specifically, maybe within the way they've configured particular things that have nothing to do with patches, lots of different types of vulnerabilities that exist. That's the beginning of the methodology. As you go through identifying those vulnerabilities, then you have to come up with a plan of, call it a plan of attack, an anatomy of an attack. And that anatomy of an attack is going to have to require you to sit down with the client and try to determine what is the expectation from the client as to what the offensive security or the pen test is going to try to entail to do. You can't just say that I'm going to do a pen test of everything. So you have to come up with some objectives. You have to have some rules of engagement and some expectations as to what the client intends to have you do, whether that be trying to attempt to test a particular web server or a database server or a particular area of the network or a particular type of set of permissions. There are many, many, many different things that could be considered objectives. So unlike the vulnerability assessment, on a pen test, we're going to be very much objective driven. Once you determine those objectives, then we can start talking about the methodology that is used to try to achieve those objectives. And then within that, we will set up limits, working with the client as to what we can and cannot do, what they want us to do and not do, when to do it, how to go about doing it possibly. And we can work through all of those details before we actually begin the engagement. And then also the engagement will have a set term limit, meaning we're not going to be there forever trying to conduct a penetration test. We may be given a week, we may be given a month or 2 months, depends on what the engagement looks like.
Understood. You brought up vulnerabilities earlier. I wanted to talk a little bit about that particular space. Can you talk a little bit about some of the more common security vulnerabilities that you would typically or encounter when it comes to the offensive side and the penetration testing activities that go on? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. I'm going to take it from a specific angle. Industry has sort of shifted over to looking at vulnerability assessments with a very heavy concentration on patches, on what we understand as patching. Where patching used to be something that was more of I typically say, more of the function of the IT admin. That a few years ago shifted over to becoming a security admin role, where now the identification of patches not being properly applied, patches not being present, became a function or the responsibility of the security folks. So in saying that, when you conduct now a vulnerability assessment, there was a big effort put towards identifying patches that were missing. And as doing that, we see that there's a tremendous push towards that. A problem that arises with that is that people have sort of put on a second plate the rest of the vulnerabilities. Patches are only a subset of all of the vulnerabilities that exist. But I've seen a lot of effort being put on identifying patches that are missing when conducting vulnerability assessments, as if this is the primary goal that organizations have, addressing patches or being as close as possible to 100% patch compliant.
Understood. Let's talk a little bit about ethics now. There's obviously some ethical considerations that kind of characterize this particular space. How does somebody who's involved in penetration testing remain ethical within legal boundaries when it comes to the kind of offensive and the attack phase that goes in when it comes to penetration testing? Can you talk about that for a minute?
Sure. I mean, I strongly believe that ethics comes with the person. So anyone who decides to not be ethical can do so just by not being ethical. So as long as you're ethical and your organization conducts their work in an ethical manner, you'll work with the organization, you'll know the legal ramifications of anything that can and cannot be done. Not only you have to understand the legality of the situation, you have to also work with the client and understand what's allowed within the client's environment. Talk to legal and have those legal folks sit down with you and say, look, there are certain things that you cannot do in our environment. There are certain servers you can't touch. There are certain areas you are not allowed to go into. Even though you may be hired to do this, these are some of the limitations that you have. All of that needs to be put into contracts. All of that needs to be well written out and well signed. I will say one thing because I've run into this. Make sure that when you do face an engagement for penetration testing, it is authorized by someone who's allowed to authorize that engagement. Not anyone can, just because they sign a document, say, oh, you're now authorized to come in and conduct this kind of work. Make sure that even though it may seem like I don't want to say you're going over somebody's head, but go talk to legal, go talk to the departments in that organization, and ensure that the person or the individual that's tasking you with conducting a penetration test is authorized to do so before you go into the engagement.
Understood. What do you think the consequences are for penetration testers that operate outside the scope of those boundaries? Are there legal liabilities? Can you speak to that for a minute?
There are plenty of cases where folks have been jailed. People have lost their licenses. There are certain types of certifications that apply to conducting some of the work, some pen testing certifications. In some cases, an organization could even remove those certifications. Whether the company does go out and check whether you actually have it or not, that's a different issue. But you could have a certification revoked. We've had plenty of little case stories out there where even though people had their contract signed Everything was, their I's were dotted, their T's were crossed. They still went in, conducted the engagement. There was an issue that they couldn't control, and they were actually arrested. And they had all the paperwork to show for what they were doing. They were just conducting a pen test. Now, in this case, it involved something that dealt with social engineering. Social engineering could be very tricky. In most environments, we get clients that do not want us to engage in social engineering. It seems to be the norm. But yeah, there's definitely legal considerations.
Hey, so that's all good and very valuable information. I'm curious, how do you handle situations where something's uncovered? Some kind of a discovery, a data breach, something that happens during testing. How does a penetration tester respond in that kind of context? Do they stop what they're doing? Do they notify? What's the kind of standard protocol for because undoubtedly that stuff happens, I'm sure.
Right. Sure. It depends very much on what it is that it's found. If what it's discovered or uncovered happens to be what we tend to consider is of a critical nature, something that, why would you wait any longer to let them know about it? Why would you wait a couple of weeks until a report gets printed out and presented to the organization when it is something that you consider to be so critical that it should be addressed now? We will do it right on the spot. As we are conducting the test, you've got point of contact. You're working with them, hopefully. And you're going to get them involved, and you're going to say, look, we've just uncovered this. This is something that we think you should take care of right now while we are actually conducting the test. And then we'll go ahead and we'll document the fact that we've actually identified that, and maybe even refer to the fact that you've already addressed it. But it will show up on the report as something that was uncovered. And that the report or the analysis will not allow you to stay in an unsecure manner any longer than necessary. It's not worth waiting for a report to be printed out later. So we do it right away. Understood.
Let's now talk a little bit about tools of the trade, right? So we've talked about at a high level what penetration testing is and kind of the ethical dimension to it and some of the challenges and the phases. What are your go-to tools for penetration testing and why? If you had to, provide context to somebody who was learning about it, what would be your kind of recommended toolbox in terms of what you would promote? Any thoughts?
Sure. There are lots of tools, lots of family suite of products. One thing that has changed over the years is we originally had a lot of scripting that needed to be done. So take your programming language to go, and a lot of scripting was being done to actually target what we thought could have been a possible vulnerability. That started turning into a combination of scripting along with lots of little bitty tools that could be found that started getting put together into family products or tools. Well, whether it was the early Knopex or the Backtrack or what then became Kali. Then within those, they started bringing in some of the exploiting type of tools or pen testing types of tools. We definitely like to work with the Metasploits. We like to work with Core Impact as sort of the primary tools. Now, what has happened is that those two tools, for all the good that they are and all the capable that they are to have you create the payloads, to have you attempt to exploit all these conditions, they've also become very well known. So signatures for those tools have also been populated into good security organizations, and they're able to detect a lot of what's done with those tools. So they're good for testing environments on an open box type of scenario where you're just testing for whether you're vulnerable or not to certain conditions. But as a bad actor trying to attempt to attack a network when you're dealing with offensive security, that may not be your best bet. But for testing purposes, they're great. In combination with scripting, we do still do a lot of scripting.
Understood. I'm curious if there's been any moments during your career in terms of testing that's changed kind of your approach to cybersecurity. Did you see something that you said, wow, I learned something really interesting through that particular experience that now I've kind of altered my thought process when it comes to, kind of best practices around hardening and information security. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're always learning. We're always learning new things. Every client is a unique situation. There's always something that pops up that maybe you didn't expect or that you didn't realize was happening, and it makes you think about that one more thing next time. So we have this continual sort of lessons learned. It's sort of like a sheet of questions that you'll go through with every client, and we continually keep adding questions to that kind of set of issues. Ideas whereby, I guess, to summarize most of what's happened is a lot of what gets done with pen testing ends up being something that in most cases you can be very successful by spending enough time on researching things about the company and trying to learn how the company does certain things that have become defaults to the organization. And I don't mean just defaults in the way they behave day to day. I mean with the tools that they use. It's very easy to learn about the tools that the company is using. It's very easy to figure out what are best practices and common settings for those types of tools, and then attempt to do your pen testing by exploiting that type of configuration, which moves away from the typical thing that organizations do, where they'll say, well, if I identify patches that are missing, if I identify these known vulnerabilities, I'll attack those. Well, most of those tend to be addressed. Most of them, if the company has any kind of security posture and a good team, they're staying on top of their patches. It's the defaults that they've created around that organization that can be tampered with, that can be bypassed, that can be altered. And then lastly, I guess the one thing that you end up realizing in most organizations that you always learn from is the fact that regardless of how many security mechanisms you put into an environment, assume money is no object, and you've deployed every single layer of security that you could think of. Ultimately, all of those mechanisms allow the user to go out and do things. So because you have to allow those users to conduct their day-to-day business, that's what can be exploited. And if you hear about a lot of the case studies of things that occur, in most cases, when you read down to the bottom of it, they're not that technically savvy. They just took advantage of getting someone to click on an email. They just got someone to fool them into going to the wrong website and clicking on that link that looked like what they were trying to get to, but it wasn't.
Understood.
Because we need to allow that.
Understood. Hey, I want to ask a question because you're delving into this, which is really just great timing. Let's talk about social engineering. You talked about getting someone to click on a link. How significant is that in the penetration testing model? And ultimately, what kind of forms does it take? It sounds like you kind of alluded to it, but I thought maybe you could kind of build on top of that question based on what you just mentioned.
Yeah, social engineering, I mean, it's typically taking advantage of the way us humans work and operate. So if you're able to take advantage of what you think is right, things that are common to you, for years and years and years, since the early days of security, we've always learned that if you attend the basic security awareness class, you can learn about what not to do, what not to fall for the typical things that everybody falls for, that could happen. And you would think that by today, that doesn't happen anymore. Well, it's actually the opposite. It happens a lot more. Why? Because of the development of all of these social networks. I mean, something that we didn't have in the early days. Today, everyone is a big user of social networks. And in social networks, people have actually taken this new attitude of, I can post anything and everything about my whole life. Everybody knows your hobbies. Everybody knows 90% of your activities. Everybody knows so much information about what you do on a day-to-day basis, you as an individual, as well as you as an organization, because everything gets posted in some kind of reference, everything gets posted, that as a social engineer, now you could easily just do open source and open source technology and actually find out all this kind of information before even touching the organization, and then hit the organization with these things that are very, very sound legitimate to the organization. You could actually target directors, the operational of the organization, or all the way down to the everyday personnel, and hit them with something that seems like it's their boss talking to them, seems like it's something that is one of their hobbies. We're sending them an email about a coupon, an offer, a discount. You can walk around and post on a little wall a barcode for them to click on and get an additional discount to a conference, or just to say whether they're invited to a conference, if they want to attend or not. Just basically scan your barcode and you'll get the invite. How many people are going to scan it? Anybody who seems to think that the conference is interesting, and it could be totally bogus. And now you got some information from them, and it's something that they requested. So social engineering, it's actually extremely successful I think that if the organization wants you to test for that, you would definitely be able to go very far in identifying many weaknesses. But the norm of what we get confronted with is that organizations seem to take the approach that, well, we know we're vulnerable to that, so we don't want you testing for that.
Understood.
They seem to understand that they would fall for it, and they may not even know how to address it.
Understood. We're running low on time. One of my last questions for you is about a minute and a half left. If you were to look into your crystal ball, what kind of emerging trends in cyber do you think are becoming impactful and ultimately are influencing penetration testing and offensive security? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think it's. I'll keep this short. Artificial intelligence. The introduction of artificial intelligence into not only pen testing but all of the other technologies. But if you bring it into pen testing, you will be able to create the models, the algorithms that can actually much quicker go through some of the repetitive tasks, and then through some of the machine learning and some of those components, be able to do a much better job at identifying those vulnerabilities, as well as then on the defensive side, you'll be able to also, if you incorporate artificial intelligence, be able to do a much better job at it. Basically, to the overall threat exposure, to the overall unified threat management.
Understood. Hey, Antonio, how can viewers learn more about you if someone wanted to reach out and wanted to follow up and have additional questions?
Sure. They can look us up at www.lusec.com. That's LUSEC. Or send me an email directly, aluna@lusec.com.
Awesome. Antonio, we're out of time. We want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your invaluable insights with our viewers. We truly appreciate the expertise that you've brought to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Jim. My pleasure.
Absolutely. So that's going to go ahead and conclude today's episode. We want to extend our thanks again to Mr. Antonio Luna for his invaluable insights into offensive security and penetration testing. We hope that today's discussion has been enlightening and stimulating, offering fresh perspectives on effective cybersecurity strategies. To learn more about cybersecurity today and stay updated with our future episodes, please visit our website at www.cybersecuritytoday.org. Additionally, you can scan the QR code displayed at the bottom of your screen for quick and easy access to our show's website. Finally, we welcome your questions or comments via email at contactus@cybersecuritytoday.org. Feel free to reach out to us. That's going to do it for today. Thanks a lot for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Stay safe, stay informed. Have a great day.